Mhm.
You had mentioned that if you were a historical character, you would pick Wendy Darling, I assume, from Peter Pan. I'm curious, can you unpack that? Why Wendy? What is it about her?
She's just I just really like her curiosity and she loves stories and I love stories too and she's always willing to tell one to her brothers and then when she meets Peter and his band of kids that she's like, okay, I can do this. So she's just very gung ho about the whole thing and goes with the flow. And she
Mm-hmm.
even teaches them some lessons like a mother. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought she's a really good and well rounded character.
She's not only, I mean, she's meant to be kind of maternal and all, but she is quite a strong little person, isn't she?
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
hey everybody, welcome to the Catholic Author Show. Today we are joined by Susan, and is it Susan Laspe? Is that how you
Yes.
pronounce it?
Yep, you got it.
All right, Susan Laspe. She's a historical fantasy author, a little bit of a world traveler who wants to do a little, who'd love to travel some more. I'd love to hear about some of those trips to England, and let's talk about your novel. So, welcome to the show, Susan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So, for those who are just tuning in, the Catholic Author Show, it's the show about fiction for modern Catholic authors. We're talking creed, craft, and co creation rooted in grit, grace, gods, and dragons. I'm your host, Dominic DeSouza, novel lover, founder of Catholic Author. We're here to inspire your faith and your fiction. So, Susan, before talking about your novel, you've got one published, I think, and you've got another one coming up.
Mm-hmm,
Is that right?
that is right.
Oh, good. So, before diving into those, I want to hear your author backstory and how you got into writing, why you love it.
Well, so I started writing very terrible stories when I was really little. Like I would tell it to my mom, and she would write it down on a piece of paper, like very clearly, and then I would copy it
So
onto
you
the.
started with class. You had a
Yes,
transcriber
that's right.
early on.
Hmm. She was a very good listener too. But
Okay.
yeah, so then I would copy it down onto my illustrations, my little kindergarten preschool illustrations, and then
Mm-hmm.
I kind of stopped writing for a while. I did poetry in middle school, and then um, in late middle school, I started writing some also terrible short stories. Like I wrote some decent ones for school, but then uh, for myself, I just wrote whatever I wanted. Like I wrote one about uh, a flood within like a desert. Not too realistic, but it was interesting to write about. So
Was it inspired by anything? Do you remember?
um, it was more like a western desert. So I really like westerns, like Clint Eastwood and John Wayne, and so I wanted to write my own little
Uh-huh.
western, and so
Oh, those are fun. I grew up watching those. I'm trying to remember. What's his name? Zane Grey. Did you ever read any Zane Grey?
I just got some books from my uncle from Zane Grey.
Okay.
I saw Riders of the Purple Sage, and I love that.
Ah,
So
okay.
I have to read it sometime.
I've not seen or read that one, but I remember discovering his novels. I grew up with Louis L'Amour.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
What was it? Silver Canyon. Like I can't remember how many times I reread that novel. But then I discovered Zane Grey, and what I loved was his approach to crafting characters and writing stuff. Where he's like, they're always a little bit larger than life. It's like the contrast is pumped up a little bit on their virtues and the sort of it's this kind of good versus bad, and heroes trying to be heroic and being clumsy and dealing with romance, and I loved all of that stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, so where'd you go from there? How did you end up in England, and what's the rest of the story?
So for England, um, right after my freshman year of college, my dad is a huge model railroad enthusiast and regular
Oh wow.
railroad enthusiast, and in
Okay.
2004, England had their, I think it was the bicentennial of the train of the
Okay.
railroad, and so they had this huge museum out in York, and so one of his friends who's from England and moved here when he was went to college and never he, like he and his whole family moved out here. And so anyway, so my dad and his friend would go periodically out there and his friend sells model railroad stuff. So he'd get a booth,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd have this huge festival and booths and like rides and stuff, and my dad would help sell the products, and he'd get a discount on the travel fee. So in 2004, they had this huge celebration, and my family and I always wanted to go too. Like, it was always just my dad. So this
Mm-hmm.
year we all went, and it was so much fun. We went to London and stayed a few days. We did like several walking tours
Wow.
and like ghost tours. Those were so fun.
Okay.
And then we went. We took the train up to York, and the train was like, it went 100 miles an hour. About, it was so fast. We got to York in 2 hours, and it's way up there. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a lot of fun. And then yeah, we took walking tours around York, and then we went to their huge train celebration, and it just really inspired me. Like in my first novel I wrote, Sorcerous, they they travel to York and they go into the Big
Okay.
Minster, and which is their huge cathedral back then,
Mm-hmm.
and it's still there today. So that really inspired me. So I knew I
Wow.
had to write a story about that somewhere somehow.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
curious to just probe a little bit and like what was it about the what was it about York that so inspired you? I mean, you said it's old and it's way up there and there's a lot of history and what was it that just made you go, wow, as you're walking around it, I need to make a novel here. You remember?
I Yeah, just all the really old shops they kept
Okay.
they kept preserved, at least the outsides. So when you're
Mm-hmm.
walking down the street, like, it just it felt almost medieval to me, or
Yeah.
at least, um, you know, I loved it so much,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you can't get that as much out here in the states,
Mm-hmm.
so it's, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I just loved it so much, and like the wall and just how much history it had, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I visited England for just a couple of weeks with some friends, long time ago, and I think we visited Oxford, and I remember that same feeling you're talking about, walking around things being so old. And I remember a small bookshop tucked deep in an alleyway, very much like a Diagon Alley kind of thing, and uh, and then there's an old medieval village in France. Not even village; it's like a castle town. I think the whole thing is completely surrounded by a wall, and you get inside, and it's as silent as a tomb because the wall sort of blocks all the sound out, and it's small, quiet streets, sleepy cafes, that kind of thing. It's like, yes, I want to move here. I want that apartment, and So let's talk about your novel. So you've written one. Let's talk about that a little bit. What is that story about? Sorceress, and it's also a historical fantasy novel. So how does that work?
Right. So I incorporated 14th century England with Roman mythology. I've
Ah,
Yeah, I've always been interested in mythology, especially I grew up with Greek mythology, learning all those
mm-hmm.
things, and but then when I wanted to write a book that took place in England, but they mostly had Roman mythology, which is Greek mythology. It's just when the
It
Romans took
transitioned,
over,
yeah.
yeah, when the Romans took over, they're just like, we'll take this and make it all Latinized, and yay! So Sorceress takes place right after the plagues. The bubonic plague
Okay.
happened in 1350. So this is about 6 years afterwards, and the country's
Okay.
still recovering
Mm-hmm.
from that. And so Patrick de Clifton is a knight
Mm-hmm.
in this small town in Derbyshire, and he for the past several months, a lot of people have been disappearing, and so he's
Oh.
been tasked with trying to find them. And so right before Easter, he encounters this young woman who gives him a prophecy, and at first he doesn't believe her, but then a few things happen, and he realizes maybe this isn't so crazy after all. And then he has to go on a trip and take a, a friend with him and some of his fellow knights, and they fall afoul of a sorceress who changes them all into these creatures, these mythical creatures. And Patrick accidentally escapes. He gets like all this crazy stuff happens, and he somehow manages to escape on accident. He would have stayed, but things happen. So anyway, so he finds a couple of farmers. One is a farmer, and his twin sister is an herbalist, a healer slash midwife, and they help him out. And they decide that first backtrack. Patrick needs to find what happened to his friends, who he can't find anymore. He knows that this sorceress took them, and he realizes she's the cause of all the disappearances. So he wants to go, and these two people are also missing loved ones. So they decided to go with him, and their names are Talfrin and Brynlin. And so they go off, and they encounter lots of difficulties on the way. And I guess I should stop there, otherwise I'll give everything away.
What was the sort of the root inspiration for working on this?
So I did, again, with like Percy Jackson. I really wanted to incorporate this stuff, but
Nice.
So it started out as a really terrible idea that from like the end of college to about 2008, 2009. And then a few years ago, my one friend wanted to write a book. And so then I thought, I'll write a book. And then I couldn't find that original manuscript. Thank goodness. And then so this happened, and I thought, how can I incorporate this? And then what bad things could happen to cause the heroes to need to go on a journey? And so the original story had a witch, so I just changed her into the sorceress, who turns out to be a Roman goddess. And and her name is Circe.
I was wondering.
Yeah. That's an important part. Anyway, so Circe is the one who is behind all of this, so they don't know why she's taking everyone. And there's that.
And that's the mission, is find out why. Fun. I'm curious about you said you picked the Roman mythology, but it's set in England. And they did bring over, like with the Renaissance, a lot of, maybe older than that, but a lot of the Roman gods and stuff like that. Curious about the choice for Rome, as opposed to, I don't know too much about it, but like the Celtic mythology or the older sort of, British one. Did you ever look into that? Was that interesting to you?
Yes, I have incorporated a few European mythical creatures into the story. And I plan to have some throughout the other ones too. And it would be nice to just mix in a few here and there of like Celtic and everything. Unfortunately, I don't know too much about the Celtic one. And so, but that's a good one I might look into for future.
So you said it's kind of a Rick Riordan sort of vibe? Is that what the inspiration for it?
Yes.
Okay.
But so for the Roman ones, so a lot of the original roads that the Romans built back in.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about that. Yeah. Hadrian's Wall.
Hadrian's Wall, and then there are several Roman fortresses around there, and they all had their own little Roman gods that they prayed to and shrines to them. So I thought it would be neat to incorporate all of that within this, and we just had some of the gods just staying in England.
Stayed influential. Yeah, that's right. It was part of the Roman Empire, so that makes sense. It was part of Rome. Well, that's fun. So then, with the new novel that you're working on, it's a sequel? Is it same characters? What's the germ of fun for that one?
Right, it is the sequel with the same characters. It's the continuation of the first one. So it does, but it doesn't end on a cliffhanger. So yeah, they're not literally on a cliff. I'll tell you that.
Okay, and Is it so? It's kind of like part two,
Correct.
or it's an actual standalone sequel.
No, it is a part two.
Okay, so it'll be a trilogy or something.
Yeah. So originally it was going to be a trilogy, and then when I first wrote this book, it was too long, and
Mm-hmm.
I cut it down to as much as I could, and it was still almost twice as
Wow.
long as a book should be. So
Huh. I'm curious. Like, I'll ask you in a minute, like what your writing process is like. But what's the word count like for you to want to get it down? Like, how long was it?
I got it. I originally wrote 190,000 words, and I cut
Oh
out
my goodness, that's
yeah,
awesome.
and I cut it down to about 150, and I didn't want to
Okay.
cut it down further than that. And I know that's just
Mm-hmm.
way too long for a book, especially when I'm starting out. So I decided to cut it in almost half. It went
Okay.
slightly over half to get the first part. So they got to their destination, and then I had to
Mm-hmm.
stop there. So the second book, I'm just adding a whole bunch of extra important information, things that I wouldn't have been able to fit in the other one.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's cool. Is so. Well, listen, I'd like to ask about are you self-published or if you went with a traditional publisher, and let's talk about the writing process. So, what did you go to through the self-publishing route?
I did. I looked into publishing traditional, and
Mm-hmm.
I tried for 45 days to. All I did was research, and I only submitted 10 queries, and I only got answers
Okay.
back from three of those people, and they were the people that definitely said they would get back to me. And
Okay.
so I thought, if it takes 100 queries and rejections, it's going to take me forever. And I'd already been thinking of doing traditional. Like my good friend already does
Mm-hmm.
traditional, and or I'd already been thinking of doing self publishing, and my good friend does self publish. So she really recommends it. Also, the book would be mine forever, and
Mm-hmm.
I can publish whenever I want to. I always have the rights, and
Mm-hmm.
most people have to do their own marketing anyway. So I just thought I would try this route. And maybe for a future book series, I can try traditional again. But I'd been
Mm-hmm.
working on this book for like 5 or 6 years at this point. I just wanted to get it
Wow.
done. But I did get a professional editor, so that helped a lot.
Wow. What was? Can I ask what that process was like? Like, what was it expensive? Was it hard? How did they provide the feedback? Sharing this kind of thing with somebody else and then paying them. For those of us who are still trying to figure this stuff out and have never hired an editor before, I'm curious how that went for you.
I used this company called Readsy. I don't know if you can use that online,
Okay.
but it was um, uh, suggested by another author whose podcast I listened to, and so I checked them
Mm-hmm.
out, and they have a ton of editors and different price ranges, and you can tell them what kind of
Okay.
editor you want, and so you just send out, you find five that look good, and then
Mm-hmm.
you request a quote. So they'll come back saying if they're interested and what their quote would be,
Mm-hmm.
and so you just pick one, and then you work with them and figure out the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
They'll tell you if they.
And so that okay, sorry, that editor then went through your entire what'd you say 140,000 word first novel.
Oh,
They edited that with you.
I'd split it in half at that point, so she only had to read
I see.
about 100,000 words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's cool. Readsy. All right, that's. I'll make a note and we'll drop that in the show notes. That's a helpful tool. I know somebody else has also mentioned that, and I've seen their site in the past as well. That's cool. So that's what you used, and then, if I remember, I thought you had a. Did you? How did you handle your cover? The cover that you'd worked on, because I think the second one looked like a fun cover.
Oh, that.
Well, they both did. What am I
Oh,
saying?
thank you. The second one was just my transitionary one because I've I'm actually designed and drew the first cover, and so I'm working on my second one right now.
Oh, I see. So you created the whole first cover yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a designer, or you just enjoy painting and being creative?
So I get it from my dad, but no, I've been like drawing since I could hold a pencil.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been drawing. I craft. I really enjoy working with my hands. It's a lot of fun. I also
Mm-hmm.
looked into finding a cover designer, but some of them were expensive, and some of them take
Mm-hmm.
a, are so busy that even if they have a decent
Mm-hmm.
price, it could be months and months before you could find it. So
Yeah.
I went through like 5 or 6 different designs before I came up with that one that I have for my first
Mm-hmm.
cover. And and I was going to give up and just hire someone, and my husband goes, "No, try one more time." So that final time, it worked out, I think.
Okay. Well, that's
Mhm.
cool. So, what is your writing um, process like? Like, is it daily, once a week? How much do you like to? How long do you like to spend in doing that?
So I have a full-time job, so my time is limited to write. But I write during my lunchtime, so I get an hour lunch. But then you have to take time to make and eat lunch. So I usually get 30 to 40 minutes to work on my book. And then I
Okay.
work on it a little bit before bed. So I try
Mm-hmm.
to do that 4 or 5 times a week, and then I'll write for at least a couple hours on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so my first book took me with the 190,000 words. It took me only like 16 months, I think, 12, 15 or 16 months to write all of that, and then
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 years to edit all of that.
I can't even imagine. I've never written anything near that long. But what when you write, do you just like to just get it out, get it down, don't look back, or do you try to do you go back and edit again as well? Like, how does that work for
Well,
you?
for my first book, I did just try to get it all out and then eventually
Mm-hmm.
go back. And this one, sometimes I'll write a whole bunch and then I realize, oh, I need to add something back, and so then I start editing a little bit as I go. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
still trying to figure out my best approach, but I try to write a whole, like, at least several hundred words before going back and editing a little bit. Also,
Okay.
I think it also means I don't have to go back and edit as much later if I'm already editing as I
Mm-hmm.
go a little bit.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, that's how I try to go to. How what are some of the novels or books that you read growing up that like really inspired you and really fascinated you?
Well, as I said, I really like mythology, and I grew up with the
Mm-hmm.
Greek mythology, and then I read a lot of fairy tales.
Oh.
My parents got me this complete book of Grimm's fairy tales, and I read it cover to cover. And there are so many good stories in there, and a lot that people don't know about. There are a lot in there also
Mm-hmm.
that are very similar that I think they've combined
Mm-hmm.
together. But so that always inspired me. Also, Lord of the Rings. I didn't read it until high school, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that kind of pushed me to start writing again a little bit.
Oh, that's really
Mm-hmm.
cool. How to go back to the question about being an author and so on. What's uh, the reception been to the book? I think you said that you're also kind of doing your own marketing. Have you had fans or friends or people start reading it, and what are some of the things that they've shared with you?
Mostly, so I so most of mostly friends have bought it,
Mm-hmm.
and my family, and so everyone who's read it has told me they enjoyed it a lot. But I've tried having a little sale for my birthday in February, and
Mm-hmm.
that did nothing. But so it's a slow process. I know it takes a while after the first book. They say usually
Mm-hmm.
by the fourth book, or once you have a series out, that you get more sales and more interest. And
Mm-hmm.
since I've been trying to write faster right now, I'm not doing as much marketing for these books,
Okay.
especially since I don't have the cover out for the second one. But
Mm-hmm.
once I have the cover, which I'm almost done with, then I'll try to start really pushing it on all the social media platforms, and eventually hope to do Amazon ads and things.
After having like, you know, made the commitment and you wrote your first book and you got it out there and now you're working on the second one and thinking ahead maybe to the third or whatever else, what would you say is a number one, like, or maybe there are a couple of lessons that you learned after finishing that first book that maybe you didn't consider, didn't think about going into it, and now that you're digging into the second book, I know you said you split it in two, but and treating it like its own book, are there a couple of lessons that like you tuck in the back of your mind and you come back to as you're working on
Mm-hmm.
it?
Well, I kind of wish I had some of these ideas I'm putting into the second book. I really wish I would have had it go like from the beginning. Just it would have made the
Okay.
process easier. So if I was a better planner,
Okay.
or a plotter, this would have helped me a lot. But I pantsed a lot of it, and
Mm-hmm.
so now I'm trying to work out kinks in the second one. But I think I got
Mm-hmm.
most of them out in the first one. It's just it's a process.
Mm-hmm. So you're not a big plotter. You prefer to, um, like, how does that work for you now that you've kind of done the first book? Do you like to write out plenty of notes, or you just like to write just enough so that you can just get in there and then just write and see what happens? Or
I know there. So I have ideas of where I want to go, and I mostly plot it out. But then in the middle of doing all that, I'll decide, oh, I need more action. Like they need to suffer more. What else can I put in?
uh-huh.
But for the third book, I already have it plotted out completely. Also, so I
Okay.
don't run the same problem I had with the first book in writing
Mm-hmm.
way too much. So I'm
Oh, okay.
hoping to not have to do that again.
Sure.
Yep.
Um, you mentioned, so you said the third book you've got more plotted and so on. Do you find in the second book, I think some authors have called it kind of the, I don't know, it's like the dead zone, or it's like you sort of get stuck more often and the energy isn't moving forward and you just want to get to that third book. Do you struggle with that? Like, how do you, if yes, how do you deal with that?
Sometimes I'm really excited about
Sometimes.
the plot in the third book that I
Awesome.
just want to
Okay.
get to it. But
Yeah.
I know I have to finish this one first. But
Mm-hmm.
um but then I added a new character to the second book, so that's really kind of driving me right now. So
Oh, cool.
mhm.
Very cool. You mentioned making your characters suffer. I'm curious, like, what are ways that you uh, do that? Because um, in saying that, that kind of tells me I really don't want them to suffer, but I know I kind of need to because it is more fun, and they kind of need to. But how do you handle that? Like, what are some things that you think of when you look at a scene? You're like, okay, we need some more going on here. What are some things that you usually think about to make things more interesting?
Well, since this has mythology and creatures, so I think could something attack them, or there's magic everywhere, so what magic could happen, or is like, are they gonna have an encounter with another character? Because there is an antagonist in here who just kind of boils a character's broccoli all the time. So
When you're crafting, is it more of an episodic kind of sort of story where sort of series of things happen, or do you like to try to make things like interconnected all the way through, where one thing happens because of something else, or it leads into something else, or is it kind of like like a show with a bunch of individual things that happen that they just got to work through?
kind of both. Right now, I've been
Okay.
focusing on the connecting little things together, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a lot of fun. It is very challenging because then you have to remember, okay, did I say that right? Did I lead it right? Did I put that
Uh-huh.
in there? You know.
Do you find yourself going back to your first book and maybe retconning stuff, or um, creating fresh consequences out of in it things that happened back then and then you refer to them or have new things happen? Or is that pretty much just done? You don't really think about that book too much?
There are a couple things that I think I could
Mhm.
retcon a little bit, like near the end, but I think for the most part, the first one is pretty much done. But I could change my mind later.
So what's the target age range that you're writing for?
So, high school, like late high school through any adult. So
Hmm.
yeah, I started marketing it as young adult or yeah, young adult slash teen fiction, but
Hmm.
I I thought marketing it as just plain fantasy might be better. But
Hmm.
I might have to play with it and go back to teen fantasy because I had a 14-year-old girl read it and she loved it. So like, well, maybe I should go back to teen. So it's more in the style of young adult is how
Nice.
I write.
Okay. Yeah, I know you said Rick Riordan recently.
Mm-hmm.
I think within this past month, I read back to back three of his novels just because I'd never actually read them and always just seen them, and they always looked so fun. Um, so it was good to actually get a strong sense of his style, and uh, yeah, it's very fun. What's the age of your main character, Patrick? How old is he?
He's 18. And then
Okay.
the other two characters, the twins, Brynwyn and Talfrin, are 16.
Okay. Did you ever read the Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd
I
Alexander?
haven't.
No. Okay.
Should,
Um, for those who are watching, you might enjoy those. There, few have read them or maybe heard of them. I think outside of perhaps the UK. I grew up in Australia, so we got UK books down there too. But it's kind of set in a mythical Wales, and it's about a young. Oh, what is he? He's like a assistant pig keeper. That's his name. He's in charge of an oracular pig. It tells oracles, and and then the whole world of Albion, I think, is in danger of things, and so goes on adventures, and he meets up with different friends, and there's kind of a curious creature that tags along. Anyhow, I was just curious. The names that you used reminded me of that. Um, so you've got the new novel in the way, and you've got the third one that's loosely plotted out. Are you the kind of author where you just these are the only things you're thinking of, or you've kind of got some other ideas sort of floating around out there? Like, what's apart from these? And these are huge. What's next for you?
yes, I've got several ideas floating. I've got every time I come up with one, I add it to my list. But so I've got a
Mm-hmm.
couple of fairy tale retellings that I'm thinking of doing.
Oh, cool.
Um, I was also thinking of doing perhaps something with Norse mythology, um,
Ah, nice.
another historical fantasy with Norse mythology in there, or it could just be straight fantasy. But I'd still have to figure that
Mm-hmm.
out. And then I also thought of kind of perhaps branching off with this book, either with some of the characters that are in it,
Mm-hmm.
or continuing with some of the characters. It would be like a new arc, I guess. So,
Oh, cool. Going somewhere new with
mm-hmm.
them. Well, fun. Oh, in working on your second novel, um, are you the kind of author where you write everything privately and and then only share it after it's edited and after it's done, or do you like to bring in readers and friends like early on and kind of get their feedback and then go and write it, or brainstorm with friends and then come back and write a bit more? Like, how does that work for you?
Well, I mainly write privately, but I do like to brainstorm with other
Mm-hmm.
people because there's a lot going on up here. But so, so my
Yeah.
one writer friend, she reads some fantasy, but she mainly writes historical
Mm-hmm.
fiction. But so early on, like she and I like brainstormed both our books all the time. And then my another friend reads a lot of fantasy, and she so like a few weeks ago I had a question on how would I do this or how would you think I should go about this, and she goes, oh, and she just like was like, well, that really helped me figure out the direction I need to go. So yeah, so
Uh-huh.
I do like to brainstorm with others. It's and then I have some friends who read after I have edited a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's fun. I've got it's funny that in starting Catholic Author, one of the reasons why I did was because I love writing stuff myself, but I have no idea how to market, or how to grow or build an audience and that sort of thing. And so I kind of had to walk around that whole thing for like 10 years, try to figure it out. Like, how do you do this? What is marketing? How to do it as an author. And I've started figuring it out a little bit, and coming back now, I'm starting to get energized to get back into my own writing, and I'm trying to also think of my own way. Like, how can I involve people in the writing process? Because, like you, I love brainstorming. It's actually one of the things that's really cool about the Catholic author communities. You can post ideas in there and, like, oh, could this work? Or here's a draft of my chapter. And it's exactly actually why we put it together, is to do that sort of thing. Um, Create a friendly sort of safe space to give and get feedback. So I'm thinking about, writing a chapter, posting it in there, because it's so fun to get other people's point of view. And then the fun thing is, if you're doing like a series, or kind of what I want to do is like play off of people's expectations or learn what they are. Like, okay, you've read the last 3 chapters. What do you think should happen next based on, and then either incorporate that if they had a better idea than I did, or I don't know, just sort of go in a different way. But cool. Well, in starting to wrap up, how can people get in touch with you, Susan, if they want to check out your novels, maybe follow your blog, join your mailing list? Where can they find you online?
Yes, I'm at susanlaspe.com. I'm also on Facebook. It's Susan Laspe _author.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, well that's Instagram, and then I'm on Instagram and Facebook and also Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, I'll drop the website in the show notes. People can check you out.
Perfect.
And then in wrapping up, if you had 1 minute to share a message of encouragement to other writers, maybe some other beginners, maybe haven't yet written their first novel, or just enjoy writing in general, what would you like to say to them?
I would just say keep writing, keep coming up with new ideas. Even if something doesn't work out, like you could always either start over, or I wouldn't delete what you have in case you need to come back
Mm-hmm.
to it later. But just
Mm-hmm.
keep working out your ideas, and if that one doesn't work out, like go in a different direction or come up with, just start on something. I think the writing process just really helps you get into
Mm-hmm.
writing more and more, and then you can decide if writing is something you want to do.